11-year-old Amy stood in the falling snow outside a biker clubhouse, her hands shaking as she tucked a desperate note under a gas cap. Everyone warned her to stay away from these men. But when home becomes the scariest place you know, sometimes strangers are your only hope. What she didn't understand yet was why Christmas itself had become a weapon in her foster father's hands. The social worker's smile was practiced, warm in that professional way that made Amy wonder how many other kids had sat in this same car, heading toward some stranger's house with everything they owned crammed into a single suitcase. "Oscar's excited to have you," Miss Patterson said, glancing in the rearview mirror. "He's family, sweetie. That makes all the difference." Amy nodded, her mother's photograph pressed between her palms. In the picture, Mom was laughing, head thrown back, before the sickness had hollowed out her cheeks and dimmed her eyes. Before everything ended, Oscar's house sat on a quiet street where the lawns were trim and the mailboxes matched. Number 42 had navy blue shutters and a brick walkway that looked recently swept. Nothing broken, nothing threatening, just a plain, ordinary house that could belong to anyone. He opened the door before they knocked. A tall man with graying hair pulled back in a ponytail, wearing a flannel shirt tucked neatly into jeans. His handshake was firm when he greeted Miss Patterson, his nod to Amy brief but not unkind. "Your room's upstairs," he said after the paperwork was signed, and the social worker's taillights disappeared down the street. "Second door on the left." The room was small but clean. A twin bed with a blue comforter, a desk under the window, an empty bookshelf waiting to be filled with a life Amy didn't have anymore. She set her suitcase down and placed her mother's photo on the nightstand, adjusting it twice until it felt right. Dinner that first night was spaghetti with Jared sauce, eaten in silence except for the scrape of forks against plates. Oscar didn't ask questions about school or friends or how she was feeling. He simply ate, washed the dishes with mechanical precision, and told her bedtime was 9 o'clock on school nights. Amy lay awake that night, staring at shadows on an unfamiliar ceiling, listening to the sounds of a house that wasn't hers. Pipes creaking, the furnace humming, Oscar's footsteps moving downstairs, then stopping. The routine felt hollow but safe, predictable. After months of watching machines beep and doctors whisper and her mother's struggle for each breath, this silent routine felt almost like relief. The first few weeks blurred together. Oscar drove her to school without conversation, picked her up at 3:15 exactly, made dinner that was always adequate if uninspired. He worked construction, leaving before dawn and returning with sawdust in his hair and exhaustion in his eyes. They existed in parallel lives under the same roof, two people orbiting separate griefs. Then November ended. Amy was walking home from the bus stop when she noticed it, the house across the street suddenly blazing with color. Mrs. Roberts had strung lights along her roof line, white and blue and shimmering in the late afternoon gloom. A wreath hung on the door, pine branches dotted with fake berries. Oscar was standing on the porch when Amy walked up, frozen mid-step, his keys dangling from his hand. He stared at the lights with an expression she couldn't read. Not anger exactly. Something deeper. Something old. "Oscar." He blinked, seemed to remember where he was, and unlocked the door without answering. That night, Amy woke to the sound of footsteps downstairs, pacing, back and forth across the living room, a restless rhythm that went on for hours. When she came down for breakfast the next morning, Oscar was already at the table, pouring something amber into his coffee from a flask that disappeared into his pocket when he saw her. "Sleep okay?" he asked, his voice rough. "Yeah," she lied. He nodded and returned to his coffee, staring past her at something she couldn't see. The decorations spread across the neighborhood, house by house, light by light, until every street glowed except Oscar's dark porch. He stopped answering his phone when it rang, stopped showering regularly. The mail piled up unopened on the kitchen counter. One morning, Amy found him at the calendar, a pen gripped tight in his fist. He'd circled December 23rd so many times the paper had torn through, leaving a ragged hole where the date should be. She wanted to ask why, wanted to understand what was happening to the quiet, distant man who had at least been steady. But the air in the house had changed, grown heavier, charged with something Amy recognized from her mother's final weeks. The feeling that something terrible was coming, and all you could do was wait. Amy tested the back door that night, the one off the kitchen that sometimes stuck. She pressed the handle slowly, felt it give without sound. Just checking, she told herself. Just in case. She left it unlocked. December arrived with the first real snow, and Oscar stopped pretending everything was fine. Amy noticed the whiskey bottle on the counter one morning. Cap off, amber liquid catching the pale winter light. By the time she returned from school, it was half empty. Oscar sat at the kitchen table, still in yesterday's clothes, staring at nothing. "There's leftover chicken in the fridge," he said without looking at her. "Heat it up if you want." She ate cereal instead, standing by the sink, while he remained motionless in his chair. The relatives started calling more frequently. Aunt Linda, cheerful and insistent, leaving voicemails about Christmas dinner plans. "We'd love to have you both. Amy needs family around her first holiday season. Call me back, Oscar. Please." He deleted the messages without listening to them fully, his finger jabbing the button with increasing force each time. At school, Amy found herself flinching at sudden sounds. Locker doors slamming, someone dropping books in the hallway. Her teacher, Mrs. Brennan, kept her after class one afternoon, concern creasing her forehead. "You seem tired lately. Is everything all right at home?" Amy's throat tightened. What could she say? That the house felt wrong in ways she couldn't name? That she was afraid of something she couldn't point to? "I'm fine," she whispered. "Just adjusting." Mrs. Brennan didn't look convinced, but she let Amy go. Oscar's control was eroding piece by piece. On December 10th, carolers knocked at the door. A church group with matching scarves, their voices bright with joy to the world. Oscar yanked the door open so violently one of them stumbled backward. "Get off my property." His voice was raw, savage. "Take your goddamn singing somewhere else." They scattered, bewildered and hurt. Oscar slammed the door and stood there breathing hard, his hands trembling. Amy had watched from the stairs, her heart hammering. He didn't apologize, didn't explain, just walked past her like she wasn't there and locked himself in his room. 2 nights later, she woke to the sound of breaking glass. She crept downstairs to find Oscar in the kitchen, a shattered coffee mug scattered across the linoleum. He stood at the sink, staring at his bleeding hand with a strange detachment, as if it belonged to someone else. "Oscar, you're hurt." "I know." His voice was flat. He ran water over the cut, watching blood swirl down the drain. "Go back to bed, Amy." She didn't move. "What's wrong? Why do you—" "I said go to bed." She fled, but didn't sleep. Just lay there listening to him move through the house below, opening and closing cabinets, muttering words she couldn't make out. The house began to decay around them. Dishes accumulated in the sink, crusty with dried food. The trash overflowed. Oscar's bedroom door stayed closed for entire weekends, and when he emerged, his eyes were bloodshot, his jaw covered in uneven stubble. Amy started keeping her backpack by her bedroom door, packed with essentials she rotated daily. Clothes that wouldn't be missed, the photographs she kept safe. She told herself it was just in case, though she didn't want to examine what in case meant. On December 18th, Mr. Martinez next door hung a new speaker system, testing it with a holiday playlist that boomed through the shared wall. Mariah Carey's voice soared through "All I Want for Christmas," cheerful and relentless. Oscar's response was immediate. He hammered on the wall with his fist, shouting profanities. When the music didn't stop, he grabbed his coat and stormed outside. Amy watched through the window as he confronted Mr. Martinez in the driveway, jabbing his finger, his face twisted with rage. Mr. Martinez turned the music down, hands raised in peace. But the damage was done. The neighbors had seen. Curtains twitched in windows up and down the street. When Oscar came back inside, he looked at Amy standing in the hallway, and something in his expression made her step backward. "What?" he snapped. "Nothing. I just... Stop looking at me like that." He pushed past her, and she heard his bedroom door slam, the lock click into place. That night, Amy pulled her packed backpack onto her bed and stared at it. The house felt like a trap waiting to spring. Oscar's anger wasn't directed at her. Not yet, but it filled every room, poisoned every breath. She couldn't explain it to a teacher or a social worker because there were no marks, no clear violations. Just the terrible certainty that something was about to shatter, and she needed to not be there when it did. She fell asleep with her backpack as a pillow, her mother's face smiling up from the photograph on her nightstand, and wondered how long she could keep pretending this was still a home. Downstairs, Oscar's television played white noise into the empty room. Amy wondered if he was even watching it anymore, or if the sound just filled the space where words used to be. She pulled the blanket tighter and tried not to think about December 23rd, still 5 days away. The explosion came on a Thursday. Amy had learned to read the signs. The way Oscar's jaw clenched when he heard distant music, how his fingers drummed against his leg in an agitated rhythm, the smell of whiskey that started earlier each day. By late afternoon on December 20th, every instinct told her to stay in her room, door locked, headphones on. But she needed water. Her throat was dry from anxiety, from holding her breath every time she heard him move downstairs. She crept down quietly, bare feet silent on the worn carpet. Oscar sat in the darkened living room, illuminated only by the glow of the television he wasn't watching. An empty bottle stood on the coffee table beside him. His eyes tracked the Christmas lights blinking across the street, his expression hollow and haunted. Amy filled her glass at the kitchen sink, movements careful and small. Then the music started. Mr. Martinez's new speakers erupted with Bing Crosby's White Christmas. The volume cranked high enough to rattle the shared wall. The cheerful crooning filled every corner of the house, inescapable and relentless. Oscar was on his feet instantly, the coffee table knocked aside. "Make it stop," he growled. "Make it stop." His fist went through the drywall with a sickening crunch. Plaster exploded outward, white dust clouding the air. He pulled his hand back and punched again, and again, roaring wordlessly, each impact accompanied by the grotesque sound of knuckles meeting with studs. Amy's glass slipped from her fingers, shattering on the kitchen floor. Oscar didn't seem to hear it. He was somewhere else entirely, lost in whatever nightmare played behind his eyes. His fists bloody now, the wall demolished. Instinct took over. Amy seized her backpack and ran, her feet finding shoes by pure muscle memory. The back door, the one that didn't squeak, the one she'd tested a dozen times this past week. Cold air hit her face like a slap as she stumbled into the night. Snow had started falling, soft and steady, muffling the world. Amy's breath came in gasps that formed clouds in the freezing air. She ran past Mrs. Roberts's house with its twinkling lights, past the Johnsons' inflatable snowman swaying in the wind, her lungs burning, tears freezing on her cheeks. 2 blocks felt like miles. Her thin jacket was no match for December's bite, but she kept moving until she saw it. The Black Rain MC Clubhouse, a low brick building with motorcycles lined up out front like sentinels. Her mother's voice echoed in her memory. "Stay away from that place, baby. Those aren't the kind of people we talk to." But those people weren't the ones who'd just put their fists through walls. One bike stood apart from the others, an old Harley she'd noticed 100 times walking past with her groceries. Weathered leather seat, chrome that caught the streetlight despite years of weather. It looked solid, permanent, like it had been there forever and would be there tomorrow. Amy's hands shook so badly she could barely grip the pen. She dug in her backpack, found the spiral notebook she used for English class, and tore out a sheet. The paper fluttered in the wind as she pressed it against her thigh and wrote, her handwriting barely legible. "My foster dad hates Christmas. Can I stay here? I have nowhere else to go. Please. I'm 11 and I'm scared and I don't know what else to do. Amy." She read it twice, wondering if it sounded crazy, if this was the stupidest thing she'd ever done. Her mother's voice whispered warnings about bikers, about dangerous men. But dangerous was relative now. She folded the paper carefully, lifted the gas cap with trembling fingers, and tucked the note inside where it wouldn't blow away. The 24-hour diner on Main Street was the only place with lights still on. Amy pushed through the door, a bell chiming overhead, and the warmth hit her like a physical force. A waitress with tired eyes and a name tag reading Deb looked up from wiping down the counter. "You okay, honey?" Amy nodded, not trusting her voice. She slid into a booth by the window, as far from the door as possible, and ordered hot chocolate with the crumpled $5 bill she'd been saving. The mug arrived steaming, piled with whipped cream that melted into sweet rivers. Amy wrapped both hands around it, trying to stop shaking. Through the window, she watched snow accumulate on parked cars, on streetlights, on the empty sidewalks of a town that had gone to sleep. Every time headlights swept past, her heart lurched. Would Oscar come looking? Would he even notice she was gone? Part of her hoped he'd walk through that door sober and apologetic and somehow magically okay again. The other part, the part that had heard with splintering and seen blood on his knuckles, knew better. Deb refilled her hot chocolate without asking, without comment. The diner's clock ticked toward midnight, then past it. Other customers came and went. A trucker ordering coffee to go, 2 teenagers giggling over shared fries, an elderly man reading a newspaper at the counter. Amy stayed, making her second hot chocolate last, watching dawn creep slowly across the horizon. A man at the counter, 50s, wearing a factory uniform, caught her eye and offered a kind smile. Rough night. Amy nodded, not trusting words. He slid a napkin across the counter with a number scrawled on it. Crisis hotline. For kids. Just in case. Then he left cash for her hot chocolate and walked out without another word. Amy stared at the napkin, this small kindness from a stranger, and felt something shift. Maybe asking for help wasn't weakness. That could be the bravest thing she could do. Pink light touched the snow-covered streets, making everything look clean and new and painfully beautiful. When the sun finally rose, she had no plan. Only a note tucked under a stranger's gas cap and a desperate hope that someone, anyone, would find it and understand that a child shouldn't have to be this afraid in the place that's supposed to keep her safe. She paid with quarters and dimes, left Deb the remaining change as a tip, and stepped back into the cold morning. The clubhouse was 3 blocks away. Her note was still there, waiting, and Amy, exhausted and terrified and clinging to the last threads of hope, had nowhere else to go but back toward the place everyone told her to fear. Reiner found the note early Friday morning, just after sunrise, his breath forming clouds as he approached his Harley. He'd ridden that bike for 15 years, knew every scratch and dent, and the gas cap was never loose. When he lifted it, the folded paper fell into his palm. He read it once, then again, his jaw tightening. By the time he pushed through the clubhouse doors, his phone was already at his ear. We've got a situation. Within the hour, the club had gathered around the scarred wooden table where they usually played poker and argued about carburetor adjustments. Reiner laid the note in the center. No one spoke for a long moment. A kid wrote this, Felicia said finally, the club's bookkeeper and the closest thing they had to a voice of reason. She's a kid, scared enough to leave a note for strangers. Could be a setup, someone muttered, but even he didn't sound convinced. Or it could be a kid in real trouble, Reiner replied. Either way, we find out. They split up, combing the neighborhood. It was tiny, 6'5" and built like a refrigerator, who spotted Amy through the diner window, slumped in a booth with an empty mug and exhaustion written across her small face. Reiner went in alone, not wanting to overwhelm her. He slid into the booth across from her, his leather vest creaking. Amy's eyes went wide, but she didn't run. You left something on my bike, he said quietly, pulling out the note. Her lower lip trembled. I didn't know where else to go. You did the right thing, but we need to get you somewhere warm. Figure this out properly. That okay? She nodded, and he saw her decide to trust him. Not because she wanted to, but because she was out of options. The clubhouse embraced her with unexpected gentleness. Felicia appeared with blankets that smelled like fabric softener and made pancakes while Amy sat at the table, wrapped in layers, watching these intimidating strangers move around her with careful courtesy. Social services is on their way, Reiner told her between bites. They'll want to talk to you, make sure you're safe. But until they sort things out, you're staying here where we can keep an eye on things. Nobody's going to hurt you. Understand? Amy nodded, syrup on her chin, something loosening in her chest. She almost started crying then, but from the strange relief of someone saying nobody would hurt her and actually meaning it. She bit her lip hard and focused on the pancakes instead. The investigation moved slowly, bureaucracy wrapped in holidays and weekend schedules. Oscar was evaluated, the house inspected, Amy gave her statement to a kind woman with a clipboard who asked gentle questions and took careful notes. But the system took time, and Amy needed somewhere safe now. The clubhouse became her temporary world. She slept on Felicia's couch, helped wash dishes after the crew's dinners, learned that these rough-edged men with their tattoos and scars were better at kindness than anyone had given them credit for. Reiner taught her card tricks to keep her mind occupied, his scarred hands shuffling with practiced ease. "Idle hands make for racing thoughts," he said. "Keep 'em busy." They were preparing for the annual Christmas toy run, an event Amy learned they'd done for 12 years straight, riding through town with wrapped presents for kids who needed them. She helped wrap gifts in the garage, string lights on a small plastic tree someone had donated, and slowly, carefully, began to feel like maybe the world wasn't entirely made of breaking things. It was during one of those quiet afternoons, while rolling up ribbon, that Amy found herself talking about Oscar's calendar, about how his anger always peaked the same week, about the way certain songs, always the old ones, the classics, made him look like he was drowning. Felicia exchanged glances with Reiner. They'd seen trauma before, worn it themselves. The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. Reiner leaned back, connecting pieces. That date he circled, 23rd. That's when it gets worst for him, isn't it? Amy nodded. They made calls, found an old drinking buddy of Oscar's who, after some coaxing, shared what he knew. The story came out in fragments. Oscar's father, Christmas Eve decades ago. A fight that ended with a door slamming and an engine starting. A 7-year-old kid left alone in a house where the lights kept blinking and the turkey kept cooling and nobody came back. Ever. No one had helped. No one had noticed. The trauma calcified, untreated, erupting every year when the decorations went up and the carols played. The club didn't excuse him, but they understood brokenness. Reiner went to Oscar's house twice with an invitation to the toy run. Both times, Oscar refused to answer the door. The third time, Reiner simply left a flyer tucked in the screen. "You don't have to be alone with this. Come watch." That's all. Oscar stood on a street corner Saturday afternoon, hands shoved deep in his pockets, as the motorcycles thundered past. Garlands wrapped around handlebars, wrapped presents strapped to seats, riders waving to crowds that lined the sidewalks, kids jumping with excitement. There was no forced cheer, no painful music blasting, just people showing up for other people, making noise that meant something besides loneliness. Something cracked in Oscar's chest. He didn't understand it, didn't trust it, but it pulled at him anyway. That evening, the clubhouse hosted a simple gathering. Cocoa and simple food around a fire pit that sent sparks into the dark sky. Amy was helping Felicia arrange cookies when she saw him. Oscar, standing at the edge of the lot, looking like he might bolt at any second. Her breath caught. He came. For a long moment, no one moved. Oscar stood rigid at the property line, like he was deciding whether crossing it would break something inside him he couldn't fix. Then, slowly, he took a step forward. Then another. No one made speeches. Felicia handed Oscar a mug of cocoa without comment. Space opened at the fire. He sat stiffly, not speaking, his eyes on the flames. Amy approached slowly, holding something she'd made earlier. A paper ornament shaped like a tiny motorcycle, decorated with markers and glitter. "I made this," she whispered, holding it out. For the tree." Oscar took it with shaking hands, staring at the simple craft like it was made of glass. His voice cracked. "Thank you." Later, as snow drifted lazily from the dark sky, Amy sat beside him. "I thought Christmas would ruin everything." Oscar was quiet for a long moment, watching the lights Felicia had strung gently across the garage. Soft white, not flashing, not aggressive. "It almost ruined me first," he said finally. There was no miracle. Therapy appointments were scheduled. Boundaries were established. Amy wouldn't return to that house, not yet, maybe not ever. But surrounded by people who knew that broken things could still ride strong, that healing happened in miles, not leaps, it felt like the beginning of something. Not perfect or easy, just possible. Sometimes the people who save us aren't the ones we expect. They're the ones brave enough to see pain and say, "You don't have to carry that alone." Oscar's road to healing is just beginning, but so is Amy's sense of belonging. What would you do if you found that note? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story touched you, hit that like button and subscribe to embrace the journey for more stories about hope, healing, and the families we choose when life gets hard. Happy holidays. See you in our next video.